I don't know of any lifelong creative person that celebrates the outcome of their work more than the doing of the work.
Yep. Yep.
And this is where I think the confusion about AI with a lot of people lies. They're more excited about the outcome
Output.
of
Yep.
the process, right? And the outcome is mediocre most of the time, right? Unless you've really spent a lot of time with your prompts and you're figuring out through your own lived experience and you're supplying something, it's almost guaranteed to give you the most average thing you can get because it's
Mm.
based off averages. I don't I don't see it as a threat in the terms of like
Michael Hendrix, writer, author, designer, musician, and educator. He's the co-author of 2 Beats Ahead and spent decades at IDEO pioneering design sensibilities. The idea that emotional intent, not just methodology, is what makes great design. Now based in Iceland, he explores how creativity transfers feelings from maker to receiver. In our discussion, we talk about emotional transference in creative work, what AI can and can't make, and the principles that give humans meaning, no matter what the technology does.
what I'm often looking for is that transference of emotion. And when things are made from an emotional perspective, emotional intent, if they're successful, that intent can transfer to another person. I'm glad you use this word taste and values because I think what's happening is in this proliferation of abundance where there's just too much. There's too much for any one person to know about. And even within our bubbles, there's too much to know about. Multiply that by all the bubbles that everyone else is in. I mean, a curatorial perspective, we're back to constraints again, actually, and briefs is really important. Part of that might be
Before we go deep in this conversation, quick ask. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on a podcast app, please follow. This conversation is one of many that are shaping a book I'm writing on how we find meaning as we go deeper into the automation and intelligence era. It's called Practice Ground, and the book is coming later this year, 2026. Don't miss it. Now, back to our interview.
Michael, thank you for joining. I've met you. I think now I've known you for about 5 years or 4 to 5 years, right? We met after you had just launched your book, 2 Beats Ahead. You're a writer, author, designer, musician, collage artist, as I'm seeing more and more of that. You're an
yeah,
educator. What else?
that's good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You're a dad. You're a great guy. So I think, I've told you I'm writing this book about finding meaning, and the more we go deeper into this automation age, right? So I think it really spurred the reason I started writing this book. I think right after I finished writing Toffee's Divide, which was, I think you remember that, the sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
I was making a mixtape for the book, which was actually, the mixtape actually inspired the entire book. And I remember I was trying to compose a song, right? And I wrote it down. I had the beats that I was using, and I kept like practicing, like, okay, eventually I'm going to put the mic on and, do my thing. But I kept like stalling when I was practicing. And eventually, it was getting dark. I was just like, man, just hit recording, just go. Right. And that really stuck with me, just like hit record. And I think I recorded it. It was like one take. And I kind of kept it in mind, like hit record. Right. So that was the first direction of the book. I was like, man, there should be a book. I should write a book about getting people to just go. Right. Just hit record, do your thing. But the more I started writing and structuring the book and all that kind of stuff, I was like, man, what am I really writing about here? So I kind of got stuck, right? And then eventually I was like, forget all the structure, just write what comes to mind. So I kind of set a process where every Saturday I'll write for 1 hour, just top of the mind stuff, right? And it eventually came around that I was trying to find meaning, right? In everything I was doing, whether it was writing, whether it was building a business, whether it was making music, and this question of like, what does it mean to be a human, particularly in an era where the things that gave us purpose, like work, a job, doing things, seems like it could easily be automated. The deeper we go into the 21st century, right? So that is kind of what has spurred this, and I'm kind of reaching out and just finding out from people their take on it, right? So for you, like, I'll start from the very beginning, all the ways you express yourself, right? What does your medium, whatever medium comes to mind in this moment, allow you to express that words or logic don't?
Well, I think there's so much that we as humans express without words anyway. I mean, this, being in a room with somebody, you cannot say anything to each other, but have some kind of communication or connection with each other, whether you're strangers or people that know each other really well. And then there's another level of that, is that we're constantly reading our environment.
Mm-hmm.
There's studies that say, the reason that we are more calm in the wild environments is because evolutionary, we learned certain things about those contexts that make us relaxed, and then we're not under threat. And this is applying on our daily lives to the familiarity of a room, the people we see, etc. But like when it comes to music or design, it's just another unpacking of that. There's the symbology of, the images you're choosing. There's the power of the colors, the effect colors have on people, the associations they have with those colors. And then with sound, it's the same. It can be anything from the familiarity of melody or beat to the subconscious things like the quality of the texture of a sound, whether it's broken up or smooth, whether it's sharp or dull. And so everything is communicating in some way, and I think as an artist, then what I'm thinking about often is how, in my understanding of these symbols or these experiences, is there meaning I'm trying to convey through the choices I make in them, feelings I want people to have. I feel very strongly that I felt this when I was at IDEO, and we started talking about designing with sensibilities, not just methodologies, that when things are made from an emotional perspective, emotional intent, if they're successful, if that intent can transfer to another person. It's very likely that the person on the receiving end can feel that anger. If I make something with joy, it's likely that someone can feel it with joy. And if they can't, then somehow the the medium I've chosen or the choices I made to express that medium didn't quite do it. But it's successful when you can transfer. So at least that's what I'm often looking for, is that transference of emotion. And I have no idea if successful, on a mass scale. I know individual stories where it has been, but that's the long answer question.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you said, because even at Stanford, when I started learning about this design thinking and D school, right? And they tell you to start with empathy, right? And kind of understand who you're building this thing for. Start with that level of curiosity to understand what you want to build for them. And there was someone I really learned from, and his approach to building products was just start with the end goal of how do you want the person to feel, right, on the end, and just reverse engineer everything backwards. And that was such like a big mindset shift for me, right? Because as an engineer, my go-to was just like, oh, I can build something. I have a problem, I can build it. I'm sure other people have this problem, but that doesn't really pan out sometimes, a lot of times actually. So for you, did this sense and this understanding, did it come from you just tinkering, playing around with your music, different forms of art, or was it like a very systematic thing you learned from being at somewhere like IDEO?
No, I didn't learn it. It's something I brought to IDEO because I had noticed. All right, tell you a little story. I had noticed, being at IDEO, I had, design thinking is a heavy user research methodology, at least for the front end of that. You're doing a lot of interviews, a lot of observation. You're in a learning mode. And this is how empathy happens, right? Or it's the exercise of empathy, trying to understand how other people live. But what I noticed over time is that as the practice of design thinking got more popular in business schools and companies, the methodology, the practice of like, do this, started to seem like a recipe. And then on the far end of that, people, usually clients, were starting to see the methodology as an empirical evidence gathering process, which it's not.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's qualitative research. It's not quantitative. It's not empirical evidence. It's lived experience. They're different. But what I saw with younger teams and designers, because they started to look at this practice as, I need proof about my design decision. I saw this in the field, therefore we made this choice, right? And that works very well in a case study. People love to read that in a case study. But I knew from practicing design for, at that point, almost 20 years, that there was a whole nother level of justification for design, and I knew from speaking to so many other seasoned designers, there were certain ways you would talk about design, would often be metaphorical, about the way design made you feel, or the way a concept touched somebody. Those things were rooted in human experience as well. They weren't observed in this particular week of a project, but they were as valid as a reason for choice in the design process as something you observed. So I think this is what forced me to try to articulate this. I wrote a paper with Jane Fulton Surrey about this in 2010, about this idea of transferring design sensibilities and emphasizing them as much as the methodologies.
Yeah.
But when I did that, then I started thinking about it in terms of other things, like music that I enjoy. Like, what was it about the music that I enjoy? When I say music sounds blurry, or it sounds like it's an enveloping warmth, or I might say, it's disorienting. Like, those are all metaphors, right? Like, music in itself cannot be any of that factual. It can only be sound waves. That's all it can be. And it's causing me to have all of these emotional responses.
Yeah.
And it was helpful for me to think about music and design in that way, because it explains, like, when you walk into a space, the feeling you have in that space, the emotional response to that space, is a reaction to all the aesthetic choices in that space, the positioning of the space, the material choices, right? Just like the music. Because the space in and of itself is just, some walls and some chairs and whatever.
Yeah.
This is true for objects we design. This is true for graphics, everything. So this just put me down a path of trying to tell this, from a designer's perspective, and eventually, a musician's perspective. And some of this ended up in Two Beats Ahead, and there's a chapter about artistry or sensing or something. I don't know my book, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
But I went deep down this. I contacted George Lakoff at Berkeley, California, who is a famous linguist and cognitive. He was working with cognitive scientists, trying to understand, like, can we look at how metaphors are understood by the brain and scan that, and see the neurons firing. And one of the things they determined is that whether the brain does something or you imagine doing the action in your brain is the same. And this explains why. I can imagine running, or I can be running. Mentally, it's the same thing happening. Therefore, when I'm watching a film, I'm reading a book, I can be there. I can feel it.
Yeah.
This is where the transference thing matters. This is all full circle. You're activating literally activating parts of the brain. Transference.
Man, and it's interesting you say this, because even for me, as with music, for instance, like, it's more of a feeling thing. So when I sample, I'm just like, oh, I felt something, and I want to capture that thing I felt, and I want to maybe stretch it, compress it, do something to it. But I just want to capture the feeling and hope that maybe other people can get that feeling also. But it's not something I can actually, as you said, quantify, even qualify. Now, with writing, I've been reading a lot about metaphors, right? There's a book I really want to read. I've forgotten what it is, but it's all about how important metaphors are in life, and just for innovation and discovery and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that you can use a metaphor that can just, like, explain something that would take like 3 pages to explain in just one line of a metaphor. And obviously that person has their own mind of, like, what does this mean to me? Like, what did I experience in my childhood or whatever, and just opens up everything. And for me, the favorite writers I enjoy, they can write stuff and then just one line, they just write a metaphor, and then boom, everything just opens up, and you just want to keep reading. And I find, like, with writing, it's even the way I approach my writing now, especially in my weekly newsletters. The first thing I do before I write, how do you want the person reading this to feel at the end of it? Question mark. Inspired, motivated, clear, and what do you want them to do? Question mark. What's the one thing you want them to remember? And when I'm going through my drafts, edits, I'm going back to that thing. Like, is what I'm writing staying to in course? Because as a writer, I can start going a different direction, but not staying true to the intention. And I found that that's been a good process for me, kind of stating that audience intention first.
Yeah, I mean that's a practice I do in design. You write a creative brief. In your creative brief, it's not only the constraints of the project, like what are the parameters of the project, so to speak, but it's also the things you're trying to achieve. One of those things might be how people feel, right? But I think it's very important on certain kinds of creative projects to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually say the opposite, like for art, but I think for anything where it's like an intentional design to the process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I completely agree. And I think I was saying this earlier when we started. Even when I was writing this book, I threw out all that structure. I was just like, just write. Just discover what you're writing from writing and don't have any of these, rigid constraints, because that can also kind of take away from the work itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of audience. Like if you're making something for an intended audience and you have the empathy for the audience, that's a great framework to use to understand how to reach the audience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think when it comes to art or even the pre-design, you're just trying to express an idea or something you haven't clearly stated or may never clearly state actually.
Yep. Yep.
It's got
Yep.
complexity to it that you can't quite grasp, but it has an emotional quality to it that you can't express.
Yeah.
And I think what I've learned in myself, it's been very difficult for me as a creative person to separate design and art because I come from such a strong practice of definition and constraints and audience empathy. I think I've ruined a lot of my art by letting that creep in.
But Michael, I thought, like from my experience, like I found constraints to be very like empowering, and maybe it's my background is engineering, so I'll say I'm a very the style of my creativity is very like systematic, right? It's very the other day I was thinking, I was like, oh man, I could brand myself as the boring creative, right? Because I'm not like that, like on the far scale of stuff, right? There's the messy artist that there's a method to their madness, but it's kind of just all over the place. I'm on the other side, right? I'm on the side where it's more, all right, I need to do like 15 minutes of this today, right? Before I get to work. So very like, and those constraints then force me to just keep improving, right?
There's a
You
great
mentioned.
book that compiles these stories. It's called Daily Rituals
Mm-hmm.
by Mason Curry, and it just goes through playwrights and authors and painters and catalogs like the discipline of making. And of course, everyone had different disciplines of making, but none of them didn't have a discipline. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think what you're describing is very familiar to me too. It's a strategy to be creative, to be
Mm-hmm.
disciplined about it, and
Yeah,
it can be a simple one, like you said. It can be for 15 minutes a day. I'm focused on writing, and
exactly.
that's the discipline, right?
Yep.
And I do it every day, no matter
Yep.
what. Jeff Tweedy from Wilco, he wrote a book called How to Write One Song, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's literally just this. It's like he just tells you his discipline. I mean, he says he writes 300 songs a year.
Mm-hmm.
You
Wow.
know, and on average in a year, he might release, in a good year, he might release 40 songs. On most years,
Mm-hmm.
he'd release, but um, that means at this point, there are thousands of songs he's never shared with the world.
Yeah.
But the point isn't the song. The point is the process and the discipline that produces something good sometimes. Right?
Exactly. 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 So, Michael, do you have any like rituals that you go to as your go-to, like for any of your creative processes?
Yeah, I mean, there's always something, even if it's not something I've consciously stated to myself. But if I'm writing, for example, if I'm doing a writing project, that has to be, there's a certain period of time every day where that's most effective. I know this. So it's usually the time that I get up and make my coffee, I'll write for a while.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's the discipline. When I really started getting better at collage, and it took me a long time to get good at it, I had this period of time when my kids were younger, between the finish of breakfast and then catching the bus, and when they were getting dressed and things like that, was about 20 minutes. And I would just always use that 20 minutes to make. I would go to the junk mail, pull things out, tear it up, just make it. And it was the practice of doing it eventually got me good at it,
Mhm.
because it was one thing. It's one thing to, like, as a graphic designer, you're visual, you understand if something's good, but it takes a while of pushing these things around and tearing that thing up whenever to start to understand how the medium can look good, So there's the practice there.
Yeah.
With music, it's usually a different kind of discipline. It's for me, it's been a constraint of tools. Like, I might choose a tool set. I'm only going to use these tools to make this record, and so that gives me the discipline I need. But
Yeah.
there's always something.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Sometimes only certain spaces. I can only do certain things in certain spaces, so I
Yeah.
need to make sure that space for that period of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you now taking that this is your creative life, but in a place like sometimes I find the struggle when you now these things start blending into your work or the way you make income. So for instance, when you were at IDEO, did you see these same practices when you and your team were trying to make a product or design a new business model or what was there a similar systematic approach or was it just a different process?
It's a little bit different because, at IDEO, it's a very structured process. You're driven by a deadline. You know that deadline from day one. You build a project plan against that deadline. You have milestones you hit along a project. So in that case, the structure is much better defined than, say, I would if I was writing an album.
Mm-hmm.
But there's certainly characteristics about the collaboration that were similar, or maybe ways to, like, the non-creative time, which is actually very creative, very important for creativity. Learning how to use that as a discipline, like
Mm-hmm.
in the room and knowing when everybody's tired, saying, "Hey, let's go do something reinvigorating. Let's go to the museum, check out what's there, or let's go see a movie or whatever." You just have to do those things sometimes because it's just like exercise. You can't keep lifting the same weight 24/7, right? You gotta let those muscles relax. And creativity is the same. So the non thing can be it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Michael, it's interesting you brought that up because it is a perfect way to start talking about a very interesting topic, AI, right? And the reason I'm saying this is I'm currently in the Bay, Silicon Valley. And, one of my challenges, I moved out here from Austin when in 2014. I went to Stanford Business School, kind of was shuttling between Nigeria and the Bay Area for about 8 years before we moved to Los Angeles, right? And one of the challenges I felt with the Bay Area was just this kind of monotone, in my opinion, career path, right? It's where yeah, the work was good. You're seeing innovative startups and solutions, but then a lot of my conversations were just about technology, right? Even hanging out with friends, even everywhere was more like, what are you doing? That kind of thing. And I just found like I felt it dampens your creativity if all you do is talk about one particular thing or do one particular thing. And there's this culture of just go all in, go hard. You see teams running themselves rugged. And I'm like, how can you be creative if you're not resting? Right. Because I just think rest is such an important part of the creative process. What do you think about as you said in our initial thing, you can feel how a product was made, right? You can feel if someone was angry when they made a song, you can feel like like this person was angry. I'm I'm feeling some rage. And some of these products, the people making these products, they're running themselves rugged, raising crazy amounts of money, building these tools, questionable whether it's being built with any high level of responsibility or not. That's debatable. What's your take in general when all these tools come into play and it particularly how it's being built, the collective energy around it during this hype cycle and how you're thinking about its impact in creative work?
The thing I'm always seeking with a product when I'm looking at it, experiencing it, is a simple question: was it made with care? And you can tell this whether it's clothing you're wearing, furniture, room, a device. If that care has been put into it. And when I mean by care, I mean consideration of, obviously quality choices and materials. When the seams and like, any nerdy product designer will just like stare at an Apple product and like be confused that there are no seams, for
Yeah.
example. Or how did the seam end up there?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because you have to understand manufacturing and the limitations of manufacturing, and then understand how things are made. And then you have to understand how you can hack that and do something better, invent something new. And there's care in that. That care also applies to like, how do I dispose of this product, or how do I, upgrade this product, et cetera. So care is the thing I'm always looking for. And it's very easy to see when companies stop caring and they start pursuing profit, because it has an immediate impact on the quality of the product.
Mm, mm, mm.
It'll feel cheaper, it'll break faster. It will, things that I think we all inherently know as buyers of products and services, but you no longer feel like the love was put into that product. And this is why often I think like, a founder made product or service will be a better experience in its early years than its later years, because the care is not there anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's your take on how, I mean, AI has been around for some time, right? Machine learning has been around, was 70 years, 75 maybe. But now we're in this generative AI space, right? And I think a lot of in my opinion, the hype is particularly because of what it's disrupting, right? It's disrupting what we'll call white collar jobs, right? Creative jobs that we thought that, no, it's only humans that can do this type of work, right? So what's your take? What happens, when in a world where all the work that we know as knowledge work now gets outsourced to another intelligence being in the form of a machine, a computer? How would humans find meaning, particularly when we are so driven by waking up in the morning, going to go fend for ourselves, whether it's work, whether it's you're going to the farm, whatever it is, you're bringing home food. What do we do when it's almost like this sense of work has now been disrupted, at least for some people, particularly knowledge workers?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things you're asking about, identity being one of them, process being another, or method being another, and how those would play to meaning. I mean, I think we have to get clearer about certain things we want to accomplish with AI. I mean, I use it regularly, but for me, it's been very easy to use, because in the context of me being in creative industries now for 30 years and being an older guy in the creative industry, I've been a creative director and an art director. That word director is very important, because for years, I haven't actually been making things. I've been working with other people to make things,
Mm,
writing the brief, giving it to them, and then counting on their experience and their talent and their point of view to make something that makes them happy, that fulfills the brief. So the practice of framing something and prompting it and giving it to an other to make, for me, is a very comfortable practice, right? So, if it's a matter of ChatGPT or image making, or even, I've not used it to make sound yet, but that's not unfamiliar to me, and it's not scary to me, because I get it.
yeah.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of ethical problems I have with like how it learned that I'll just skip at the moment. But I just think as a practice, as this technology continues, there's a lot of people that already understand it. But what I do think it does then is like, there will be people who are not in their 50s that are good at this. They're going to be 22 or 16. And that will absolutely disrupt a tier of the industry. So that's one thing about the practice of using this. Another would be like the way I use these tools is very much based on my own knowledge and the experiences I have and the inputs I give it, right? The lived experience helps shapes the brief.
Exactly.
And there are certain things where if I'm even using the tool, I'll set it aside because I want to learn. I want to think. I have a decision I'm trying to make, and I need to feel the process. I need to enjoy the process, to
Mm,
understand, to embody it. But I think there's a shift there people are going to have to make. Like, when do you need to really embody the work, and when do you
mm,
need to outsource the work?
yeah.
They could both do the same result, but in one case, you may not understand what the result means, or you may understand how the result came about. And that could be detrimental down the road,
Yeah. Yeah.
think that's quite important. And then in terms of identity, I think the process is part of that. If you consider yourself a creative person, then I think we've talked about the discipline and the practice. I don't know of any lifelong creative person that celebrates the outcome of their work more than the doing of the work.
Yep. Yep.
And this is where I think the confusion about AI with a lot of people lies. They're more excited about the outcome.
Outputs. Yep.
The process, right? And the outcome is mediocre most of the time, right? Unless you've really spent a lot of time with your prompts and you're figuring out through your own lived experience and you're supplying something, it's almost guaranteed to give you the most average thing you can get because it's based off averages. I don't see it as a threat in the terms of like taking away. Maybe a lot of the buzz is in knowledge work, but it's a lot of average knowledge work.
Yep.
Now, you could certainly use ChatGPT and get the most basic consulting document that the interns at the biggest consulting firms would have created by doing their own research. But you can have it in 10 minutes instead of 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's real. That's real. But I find it limited still at this point in terms of creativity.
Yeah. And you know what you just said is something that right from time when I started using, Mid-Journey, what was I using? I was using Runway ML for video. I wasn't really using it for writing because writing was, for me, it was this sacred, so sacred, right? I was just like, no, I'm not using this thing for writing, particularly when I tried some prompts and they're just, as you said, average. But the more I used in the early phases 2 years ago for images, I realized, when I prompted it and it didn't give me what I wanted, then I'm like, I was getting frustrated. I was just like, oh, man, that's not what I wanted. And I went back and the back and forth of doing that, there was a day I was just like, I'm not enjoying this process, right? And for me, creating is almost like I want to enjoy the process, not about the output. And that was the moment it clicked for me. I was like, oh, I have to learn how to get into the flow of this process. I'm not there yet, right? And I keep saying like any AI tool that is going to be good for any artist, creative, designer, whatever it is, it has to prioritize getting them into a flow state, right? As opposed to prioritizing just for the output. So even for me, when I've started using it with my writing now, but I use it more as an editor, right? So I still do the writing myself because I want to enjoy that flow state of writing. But then, what I paid for when I had a book, was writing a book, was a development editor. Now have like a whole structure and just like, give me feedback on my work. Please do not rewrite this because it wants to start rewriting. I'm like, I don't want you to rewrite. Just give, give me the feedback so that I can go back and read it and say, okay, I see what you're saying, because I still want to develop as a writer. So I still feel like a long way to go. But as you said, the people that have like the mental model of actually doing stuff beforehand would be able to use the tool effectively.
Yeah.
My hope is those people have the voice to actually kind of direct these things, right? Because that's the question where it's the people that are building it versus the people that maybe want to use it. There's also like a disparity there. How would you say, there's a lot of noise, a lot of tools being built, things are moving at a rapid pace, at least if you're plugged into the news cycle and everything. How do you stay aligned with your taste or values in such a noisy environment?
I'm glad you use this word taste and values, because I think what's happening is in this proliferation of abundance where there's just too much. There's too much for any one person to know about. And even within our bubbles, there's too much to know about. Multiply that by all the bubbles that everyone else is in. I mean, a curatorial perspective, we're back to constraints again, actually, and briefs is really important. Part of that might be, sources you trust or people's other judgment that you trust. And so you go and see what they're talking about. Part of it might still be organizational trust. You can still have that, I haven't given up on organizational trust yet.
Yeah.
I still believe in science, for example. Yeah, I know. I think there's choices we make organizationally about or curatorially about organizational or individual trust and where we get information. And that's how it works. But I'll tell you this, I was thinking about it. Like, I'm not very interested right now in nonfiction books. I don't think I've read a nonfiction book in a couple of years. I've only been reading.
Same. I've been doing the same. Like, I'm just like, I'm tired of these like nonfiction books, even though I'm writing one right now. But
I know.
I've been reading just purely fiction. I'm just like, I want to, read. I want to get like tapped into more imagination than even these do this, do X, do Y.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm the same. It's like the difference between short-term truths and long-term truths. Fiction is a great gateway into long-term truth and human condition and human experience and social behavior. And then like books about what terms to use now or how to make something, 10% more efficient or, that kind of stuff. It's going to be replaced next year by the next book that promises the next thing. So it's just not that interesting to me,
Yep.
And I think those books will not be remembered.
Yeah. And even for me, like when I was writing this book, that's why I said we're going into the second quarter of the 21st century, and there are 3 more quarters. Like if one of my intentions is I want someone to read this book in 2099 and be like, wow, the principles are still the same, right? For you, what in
I
terms
love
of
that.
yeah, thank you. In terms of finding meaning, what principles do you think will just, as humans, we've always been doing it, regardless of what technology, we'll keep doing it?
Well, we've talked about the joy of creating things, in different ways. We've talked about that already. I think the other that we've not talked about yet is your personal social relationships, and it's the kind of same. I think we live in a time where people are actually judging their relationships by what they get out of them, which I think is a very sad way to look at relationships.
Yeah.
Because they're much richer than that.
Mhm.
That's like one truth about a relationship, one facet of it, but it's so much more complicated. So I think these relationships we have with family, with friends, with neighbors, etc., are part of creating meaning. They give us meaning, and when we try to reduce them to just their output, it's I think very tragic. It's this on a different level. It's the same thing about I'm talking about AI, like reducing that to an outcome is like really missing the whole point of creativity and process. So those are the twos that come to me first. And then I think there's experiences that we can have. I mean, I've been in Iceland now for a year and a half. There's a feeling of awe I can have by looking at the movement of the clouds or going to the countryside and seeing this volcanic landscape. It's meaningful because of its scale and its longevity. It makes me understand more contextually of who I am in history, and which is basically nobody, right? So I think that this is very grounding to have these kinds of experiences, right? But to make that full circle, Rick Rubin in his book talks about how great art can make us feel like a mountainside can make us feel, or a sky can make us feel.
Yeah.
It somehow it gives us context, emotional context in a different way. But I think maybe that's a transference aspect we were talking about earlier. That's meaning as well.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it's hard thinking about like what else is really meaningful, because I think there's so much distraction. We're living in an age of accumulated bragging or whatever it is, performance, whatever. Like none of that is me. I'm not going to be, if I make it to my 90s, I won't be regretting that I didn't post something on Instagram when I was 42 or was. So like none of I think it's very hard to recontextualize your current situation and remember these things without taking a pause of some kind and starting to note these things.
Yeah.
Maybe this is what matters to me. Maybe this is why art matters to you. I don't know.
Yeah. I think, like for me, it's more what do I have that is limited? The thing I know that is limited, obviously, is time, right? But also within that time is like, okay, what I do with my time, right? Because you and I will both have 24 hours. So it's more of what do I do with my attention, right? And that's a big thing where it's more, if I'm not intentional about where my attention goes, that's on me, right? Kind of, right? So like if I find myself like I'm on LinkedIn and I've scrolled a few times and I can't even tell like why. Whoa, what did you come here for? Okay, I came here to DM someone. Get to it and move on. And for me I have will I say a thought or something that is kind of emerging because I'm hearing now people are saying, what are the points of writing books? Books don't, nobody's reading books, right? And there's truth to that. But I also feel like a book as a as a product, right, is something that can be very useful in training people's attention, right? We have become so, short form, all this stuff. But reading a book and sitting down, just reading a book and not getting distracted is a way to train your attention, which then helps you be more intentional about what you direct your attention to in anything else you do in life, right? It's the same way in, as you said, nature. When you're in nature, all of a sudden, you're more present, right? And it's more about what are those things that make you present so that you can direct your attention to the things that you value. And if that thing is spending time with your family, go ahead and do it. If that thing is creating your art, do it. If that thing is building a business and solving a problem, do it. But if you're in a state where you're constantly distracted by everything that's going on, then some of these tools are actually working against you when you can be using it to kind of work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, opening a new bag of chips and getting to the bottom and not even realize how you got there. That's
Yeah,
basically what it's like. So
that happened like 2 days ago.
yeah, and you're still hungry.
Yeah. I'm just like, why did I just do that? Why?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what it is. But I agree with you. Like, it's an attention. I mean, the term attention economy, which is a very upsetting term, I think, but it's true.
It is.
You know,
Yeah.
we do have choices about what's meaning, how do we get meaning, how do we create meaning, and there's so many things working against us right now.
Yeah.
To do that.
Well, I know. All right, Michael, let me ask you one more question so I can, get you out of here. And thank you so much for your time. So if the entire world went either dystopian, right? Dystopian is like, you know how it is. Like we're all scraping, looking for food. The machines are just going around, taking care of everything, and we're lost. We're lost. We don't even know what we're doing. That's dystopian. Or utopian, right? Utopian is all sitting in the grass. The machines, they're great. They're working for us, constantly giving us our paychecks, universal basic income constantly just coming in. We're hanging out. Life is great, right? Choose one of those two. Either one. Either one works, right? Are there any practices that you do on a daily basis to find meaning in life?
I mean, I don't think I would do anything differently than I do now, to be honest. One, I'm a very critical thinker, and that can work against me a lot of time. But what that means is I'm constantly trying to understand the world I'm in and trying to tell a story about it in some way, or trying to fix it, or trying to celebrate it. So I think in either situation, I'm still making music. I'm still making art. I'm still writing.
Yeah.
I'm probably still teaching because I like to see the creativity of other people unlock. And so maybe that's revealing even to myself to know that, that like whatever happens in this crazy world, there's like,
Yep.
I have at least found a way of living that I find meaningful,
Yeah. Yeah. And that is amazing because it goes back to a question that sometimes I ask myself of if you don't have to worry about, how to make a living, what would you actually do with your time? If you don't have to think about, paying rent or whatever it is, or just working that job just because you have to do this and, or chasing an ambition because you don't want to be in the corporate rat race, but now you're in the entrepreneurial rat race. What would you actually do with your time? I think kind of opens up a lot of stuff. I know for me, I'll probably still be trying to tell a story. And whether it's by writing, making music, and just trying to see ways to connect with myself, connect with other people too. So seems you're doing the same thing in general.
I think so. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Well, Michael, thank you very much. Really, I'm grateful for your time. It's always fascinating to talk to you. I'm always eager to hear your ideas, what you're working on. And thanks for coming on. And I'll be very happy to, finally get this book out there and get you a copy so that you can actually read a nonfiction book in one in the last 4 or 3 years.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.